Hey everyone, welcome back to Every Version Ever. My name is Jonathan North, and today we're starting a brand new series looking at a brand new book, Louisa May Alcott's Little Women. This is another one of those iconic novels in classic literature that everyone at least has a bit of passing knowledge about, and may or may not have seen one of the many film or television adaptations that are out there. And it's a good bet that if they have seen one, it's probably the one we're talking about today, since apparently this is one of the most iconic versions of the story. This is the 1994 version starring Winona Ryder, Christian Bale, and a host of other big-name talent, and this version is one that so many Little Women fans cite as their favorite version of the story. I currently have no opinion. I read the book as a kid, but as far as I know, I never watched any film versions, so this series will likely all be completely brand new for me. Joining me for this first episode is Rachel Wagner, who is a big fan of the story and of this version. When I was talking to her about doing this series for the podcast, she said this was her personal favorite version, so I thought she'd be a great guest to have on to kick off this series looking at every version ever of Little Women. Okay, well, I guess first of all, I think this will be the first episode that I do. I thought this would be a good one to be like the premiere episode because from a lot of people, like fans of Little Women, this one is mentioned quite often as like the favorite version. And you said that this one was your favorite version as well. So I guess I'd never seen this. I don't think I'd ever seen any. I might have seen a version when I was younger, but I don't remember for sure. If I did, I'll probably find it eventually and it'll have a memory triggered. But like the most recent one that I'd seen was the 2019 version, which I'm not planning to do this time, but I probably will get to that eventually. So this was new to me. So you're a longtime fan, I assume. So what is it about this one that you really like?
So it's a little bit unfair because this is definitely the one I have the most nostalgia for. This came out when I was 13. So it's definitely one I've been watching for, a long, long time. Something that I, went to the theaters and watched with my mother and my sister. I also have three sisters. So I think there's something about the story that kind of rings true in a certain way, even though there's a bigger age gap in my family. We certainly all have pretty strong personalities, like the four March sisters do,
Mm-hmm.
and um, I think that it's very easy to sort of see yourself as Joe and really feel for Beth. And Little Women was the first novel that I ever like big novel that I ever really read that I was proud of that I'd read this big book and of course cry with Beth, feel headstrong and excited about Joe. And I mean I'd say that Little Women and Anne of Green Gables are probably the two most influential novels in my childhood.
Hmm. Yeah, I remember either reading or having Little Women read to us as kids because we were all homeschooled, and every morning mom would read a chapter of some book to us. And I'm pretty sure we went through the entire Little Women series at some point.
Mhm.
So I am familiar with it as the book from when I was a kid, but I don't think I read it any time after that. And like I said, I'm not sure if I've seen a version on screen or not. So between last year watching the new 2019 version and when I was a kid, I haven't had much exposure to the story. So it was kind of a refresher when I watched the 2019 version, and now I'm kind of getting back into the story doing this series. I'm still
Mhm.
not fully familiar with it because I'm trying to do an audiobook version and I'm only like halfway through. So I'm hoping that I'm hoping that's enough that I can talk about the book and the movies.
Mhm.
But I will say that watching this and having only read half of it, I felt myself being a whole lot more critical over the first half of the movie than the second half
Mhm.
because I had
Interesting.
just listened to that.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because there are definitely strengths and weaknesses to this version. There are strengths and weaknesses of every version, as you know from doing this podcast of all adaptations.
Hmm.
Um, but I actually think the beginning is pretty strong. I don't know. I think I might say the second half is maybe weaker in my opinion because I don't think they handle the Joe and Lori business all that well. And I like the idea to do two Amy's. I
Hmm.
think I still prefer the younger Amy a lot over the way that they portrayed the older Amy, but I still like that they did two Amy's.
Hmm.
I wish that all the versions did two Amy's. I just think it makes more sense than having
Yeah.
this adult play this younger child.
Yeah. I really am going. I'm trying not to compare between the 2019 version of this, since those are the two that I've seen most recently. But that's the one thing that I keep coming back to is this felt more natural. Like, I love the 2019 version. It's hands down my favorite between these two. But the first half, well, I mean, the flashbacks in that version, she didn't feel like a little kid. She felt like an adult playing a little kid.
Yeah.
And that's my biggest complaint about the 2019 version. And I really liked that they didn't, that wasn't even an issue here because they had an actual kid playing Amy. It worked really
Yeah.
well.
Agreed. I also think that they do Beth better in this version than in 2019 because I just think that Claire Danes, I mean, she crushes it. I
Hmm.
mean, she
Hmm.
makes you cry. You really feel it. I mean, just like, now I'm going first. And you're just like, oh my
That
gosh, I'm
that
so
actually,
sad.
of all the things that would make me tear up, that didn't. There was, I'll get to it eventually. There was something that did actually get me to tear up watching this, but it wasn't that.
I
we'll
mean,
we'll
that
get
gets
there.
me. I mean, she's so pale, and I mean, she
Yeah,
really earns it, I think. Whereas I felt like in the 2019 version, Beth was kind of forgettable. I hardly even remembered her at
that
all.
that is kind of true. I don't remember much about Beth. I'm more
Where,
focused on Joe and Amy in the
yeah,
2019
where
version.
I also thought in the 2019 version that the whole ending was kind of a little too cute for my taste, with her like sticking it to the publisher. And I don't know, I like the ending a little bit better in this one. I also love the music in this version. I love how
Yeah, this
they
one did have great music. Thomas
and
Newman.
yeah, and I mean, I love Winona Ryder. I think she's great in the
Hmm.
role. She's nominated for an Oscar for this role. I don't think that Susan Sarandon is the best mommy. I feel like
I was thinking the same thing.
she's a little too modern and a
Yeah.
little she just doesn't have that like that warmth and that maternal
Hmm.
kind of nature about her as much as other actresses who've played the part.
I'm glad you feel that too, because I felt like I was maybe being too critical, because that was what I was thinking the whole time. Like, she feels like somebody from the 90s. She doesn't feel like somebody from her time period. And she
Mhm.
doesn't have, like, in the book, and I'm most familiar with the first half because that's what I've gotten read so far. I mean, she confesses like she has an anger issue like Joe, but she is so quiet and
Yeah.
warm and loving, and I didn't get that enough from this version. I got that a whole lot more from the 2019 version. I don't want to keep comparing the two because that's not what I want to do here. But that's what I kept thinking of, was like, she just felt so much more like the character from the book in the 2019 version
Yeah.
than this version.
I think that the best Marmee of all of the versions is actually the 1949 version with Elizabeth
Okay,
Taylor.
that's what I'm
And
going to be
Elizabeth
watching
Taylor
next.
looks she looks kind of ridiculous playing this teenager, and this is kind of absurd. But I think that the Marmee in the 1949 version, played by Mary Astor, is probably my favorite. She's just very warm, and really in so many ways Marmee is kind of the ideal mother of literature. When she knows
Mm,
exactly what to say in all situations. She is kind, warm, forgiving, loving, all of that. I think that 1994 version, because Amy is young, I think that the Amy and Joe dynamic is probably the best out of
hmm.
any. The idea of Amy burning her book is more understandable because she's a young child. and
Mm,
and that kind of fight I think works way better. I think that the Amy and Laurie dynamic works better in 2019 because they're going back and forth. So you're not
mm-hmm.
as invested in Joe and Laurie. You're kind of equally invested in both. And so
Yeah.
that helps you. It's not as much of a kind of a shock out of nowhere. And the whole reason that she did that was because she was basically trolling her fans, Louisa May Alcott. She had gotten
Mm-hmm.
so many letters saying, "You got it. When are Joe and Lori going to get together?" And she was just like, "Forget it. I'm going to put her together with this like old school teacher." And and, and so I like it. I think it's kind of fun, but I kind of understand why a lot of people are kind of Joe and Lori shippers and don't like
Mm-hmm.
that, that he's with Amy. But I do love it in this version when she cuts her hair and Amy, yells out, "You're one beauty."
That part, I just burst out laughing.
Yeah.
You're one beauty.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love Mary Wicks in this as
Oh yes.
Marge.
When I
So
first saw her,
wonderful.
I was thinking, where do I know her from? Where do I know her from? So I was looking around. I was like, we had just a few months ago, we had just watched Sister Act. I was like, oh, that's why I know her.
Yeah. And also in White Christmas. If you ever watch White Christmas.
Years ago, I probably
Yeah.
wouldn't remember.
She plays the innkeeper, whatever, house of the inn.
Okay.
Uh yeah, the
I think she was also in Music Man.
oh probably that would make
I think
sense.
she was one of the ladies who sang
Hmm.
that Pick a Little song.
Yeah. Flick, 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 pick a lock too. There actually is a Little Women Broadway musical that's quite good. I really enjoy it.
Yeah,
Uh,
I've been trying to find out if there's a way that I can see like a legal copy of that. I've seen like YouTube versions of people they've put on the musical like
mhm.
for like a local play, which I guess if I ever do cover the musical, I'll probably end up having to watch that. But it would be nice if there was like an actual
Yeah.
Broadway cast recording.
It's tough to find those. I mean, aside from just the original cast recordings, but to actually have a video version, there's not that many of those
Yeah.
with Broadway shows,
I
unfortunately.
wish there were.
I
That's
know, I wish there were too.
like I live in the middle of Iowa. I can't afford to go to New York to watch a Broadway show, and there's so many that
Mhm.
I know I would enjoy that never get made into movies. I just wish that they would record them and put them out. Like they did that with Hamilton. I still haven't watched Hamilton. I need to, but they they did that, and I feel like there's an audience for that because that was super
I
popular. That
know.
for weeks that
Well,
was all
especially
anybody
once
was
they
talking
leave.
about.
Yeah, especially once they leave Broadway. But
Yeah,
it's I don't know what the problem is. I mean, they've been telling us we're gonna get a Wicked movie for over a
yeah,
decade, literally.
yeah.
It's never gonna happen. But but anyway, it's quite pretty if you just at least want to listen to the songs are really nice.
I
And
listened to a little bit of it. That's why I was looking around because like it seemed like something that I would enjoy.
mhm.
There's also an
Yeah,
opera.
yeah.
Well, let's start at the beginning and then go through the big scenes. Let's first talk about like why I was more critical of the beginning rather than the end. And I guess I probably once I've read the book, it might be I might end up being more critical of the end too, but I'm not 100% sure on that because the main thing that I was thinking when I was watching this was like these scenes are so short. It was like they wanted to do all of the big scenes, but they had to cram them into the movie and they just went so fast. Each scene was like 5 minutes. Like it opens with Marmee coming home, then they read the letter, boom, that's done. Christmas, boom, that's done. Like the feeding the poor family, it was like they sat down at the table, they heard that Marmee was going to visit this family, they immediately got up and took all the food out. And it's like there was no like thought given to that. Like I wanted something where they were like thinking about having to give up their meal because that was like a big thing in the book. Like they spent some time like agonizing over whether or not to
Mhm.
give up their meal. And it was a big deal. And it didn't seem like a big deal in this version. And then they didn't
Mhm.
have the scene where they came home and then they had the meal in the evening. And that kept happening.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, that it kinda clips along pretty quickly. I can see that. It is combining 2 books into 1 movie, so that's always difficult. But I guess I'm just used to it, and so it didn't seem too fast to me, but
I'm wondering if I'm going to think that with all the other versions that I'll eventually watch. There are
mhm,
some mini series though, and I'm going to watch at least one for this series. So I'm
mhm.
wondering how that will compare. Like, will I
The
enjoy the
most
miniseries more because they spend more time on these
mhm.
things?
The most recent miniseries I was not a fan of because I felt like in the miniseries they turned all of the sisters into Joe. And I don't really like that because they have their own unique perspectives and unique opinions. And
Mm,
if you make them all empowered and all outspoken, that's not interesting to me.
hmm,
And so that's why I didn't really like that version. I also hated hated the version that was a modern version.
mm-hmm. I
That
remember
was
you
in
saying that that one was a terrible
2018.
one.
That was I hated it so much. They managed to I mean, Jo is always kind of insufferable. I mean, let's be honest. She is, but we all relate to her in a way, and there's sort of a we all kind of wish that we were sort of that outspoken and that free spirited in a way. I think, especially when you're a teenager. But in this one, she just made her flat out mean. I just hated it. It was the
Hmm.
worst. But yeah, in the version on PBS, I said that I had issues with the character writing of the four girls. I felt they all were all variations on Joe instead of distinct personalities they needed to be. It's like the writers were afraid to make Meg a character that's non modern or Amy a character that's a snotty teen. It is the different personalities that make the story interesting. Them all feeling like Joe made it kind of boring and predictable. For example, Meg at one point brags about being a woman who brings home a living wage at Salamoffy's party. She would never do that. She tells the girls there that that's how things are and there's nothing that can be done to change it. Meg would never say this to Sally. She was embarrassed by her poor
Hmm.
station and had to learn from the party that the morals of her family were far more valuable than luxury.
Hmm. That'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see what I think when I get there. That does seem like
Yeah.
an issue.
But in this version, they do stay pretty distinct. And I definitely think that this is the best Beth for sure
Hmm.
in this version. I think Claire Danes is so good. And you really feel for her. And she really digs down deep, I think, for that performance.
Hmm.
And so I think she's the best. And I think that the choice to have two Amy's is the best.
Hmm.
And I wish that all of them made that choice.
What did you think of Lori?
Um, I mean, Christian Bale is very charming. Um, I I think that he's almost too charming because the other two versions, the other two film versions, Laurie is such a dweeb. I mean, he's the worst. And so there definitely is a side of you that's like, why would you reject Laurie here in this? He is so charming and so great. So I don't know. There needs to be sort of a middle in between super charming Christian Bale and super dweeb other Lauries. And someone kind of in between. You're not mad at her for rejecting, but you feel for him enough to be glad he's with Amy. I don't know. They did an
Hmm.
okay job. I mean, Timothy Chalamet feels so modern in the 2019 version, especially his hair like that. It's ridiculous. But
I didn't
it's,
even think about that, but you're kind of right. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think the scene where she breaks his heart is pretty well done in this.
Hmm.
You know,
What about the scene where they meet? I can't. I wish I could remember it. I don't think that's how they met in the book, is it? Was at that party? Because I remember the scene at the party, but I think they'd already knew each other at that point.
I think that they may have met briefly. Trying to
It seemed like
remember.
there was several times where they might have combined two scenes,
Mm-hmm.
because like one thing that I appreciated was that they actually had the Pickwick Club, which I think they changed to the Pickwick Society in
Mm-hmm.
this version because they had a PS on it, and I
Yeah,
think
that's
one of the
cute.
papers said Pickwick Society,
Mm-hmm.
and they
And that's such a fun thing to think about as a kid, is having your own little like club where you do plays and
I
have a
used to
secret
do that with my cousin.
mailbox.
We had the Boxcar Children Club.
Yeah,
It was kind of the same thing. I think we even like had little messages. I don't remember a whole lot we did. I remember we had a song that we sang.
song.
We just got together and talked about the Boxcar Children.
Yeah, because kids, they love the whole idea of that they're sort of self-sufficient on their own. I mean, that's why kids love Home Alone so much, is the whole
The,
idea of,
there was
I
a lot
mean,
of this that really kind of spoke to me as a homeschooler.
yeah,
Because I was
I can see
homeschooled, and
that.
I mean, some of the girls I think were homeschooled. Amy wasn't at first, and then she ended up being later. But it
But
just
there were
felt like they
lines.
felt like homeschoolers. And that's another thing. You talked about your sisters and you feeling like you could relate to some of the characters. My sister-in-law, Alex, who married Joel, she's mentioned before, she also has three sisters, and they saw themselves as these characters. And they all kind of have similar matching personalities. I'd have to sit down and think of like which one is which
But that's the problem,
girl,
is that
but yeah,
everybody wants to be Joe. I mean, I think most people see themselves as Joe.
I don't
'Cause you
know.
don't wanna be Amy, all, kinda snotty and burning people's books. I mean, maybe you wanna be Meg because she's nurturing and kind, and then Beth has a death plague on her, so you don't wanna be that. You wanna be her.
Yeah, but before she dies, her thing is that she's really sweet and musical, and I think people would connect with that.
Yeah, I guess. I wouldn't wanna be Beth. But I think, well, a lot of people wanna be Joe, imagine themselves as Joe.
I could see that. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Anyways, what I was saying about like combining scenes, the Pickwick Club scene, they combined that thing with the plays that they do, and they make up a lot of stories in the book, so I can understand why they would want to trim some of that because there's a lot.
Yeah.
So they combined that with the plays and had Laurie come in while they're doing the play, because it was the Pickwick Club in the book. Like he came in as part of the Pickwick Club, and that's
Mhm.
how he kind of got ingratiated into their circle of friends. And they changed that to be one of the plays that they were doing. And there was just little things like that throughout the movie where you could tell that they were combining things here and there to shorten it
Mhm.
up. Sometimes it worked better than others. Other times I was a little bit miffed that they
Yeah.
cut things out.
What do you think of Eric Stoltz's, Mr. Brooke?
At the beginning, I did not like him. I thought he was an annoying nerd.
A lot of people don't like him, think he's kinda stuck up, but I don't know, I kind of like him.
He got better throughout the movie, and I think that was probably supposed to be the point. He
Mhm.
kind of, I mean, he was already an adult at the beginning, but he kind of grew up a little bit through the movie, especially after he had to go off to war. So yeah,
Yeah.
he was, by the end I liked him.
Yeah. I liked him, and I think this one also is probably the most, if you were going to say Little Women is a Christmas movie, I think this is probably the most Christmassy of
They do
any of
have
the
several
versions.
Christmases.
Yeah, because not only do they have the opening scene, which is so iconic,
Hmm.
the Christmas won't be Christmas without any presents, but then they also have the scene with Beth getting her piano, which I
Hmm.
think is really fun.
That was one of the scenes where I was kind of annoyed that they trimmed too much, because it was a big thing in the book with Beth trying to warm up to Mr. Lawrence and going over to his house and then becoming friends and him finally
Mhm.
gifting the piano to her. And none of that was in the movie. And I
Yeah.
wanted that, and I didn't get it. So that was one of
Was that
the
in the
trimming.
new version?
A little
Uh,
bit. It was
t
more than
was it?
here.
More in the hair.
But when I watched the new version, it was before I had decided to do Little Women for this podcast, so I hadn't read the book. It'll be interesting going back to that now that
Uh,
I'm reading the book and I'll have watched other versions. It'll be interesting going back to the 2019 version and seeing how I feel about it.
mhm. This one is more historically accurate as far as costumes, except for whenever they have their hair down, they wouldn't do that in that time period. You'd always have your hair up, especially if you were a an unmarried woman. You would have your hair up at
Hmm.
all times, and so that's something that most movies from this time period always get wrong. But in the 2019 one, this costumes are actually pretty lazy. I can send you some interesting YouTube videos talking about the historical accuracy. Like there's literally a scene where the characters in 2019 are wearing UGG boots.
I might have seen one of that.
Yeah,
Is one of the people you're talking about Carolina Zabrowska? She's a YouTuber who
I think
talks
that's
about
right. Yeah,
she
yeah.
talks about a lot of period clothing in movies. Like, I would never have even thought about that, but for some reason, I got onto her channel for some random video that she did that went viral. I don't remember what it was, but she's so entertaining the way she talks about that stuff. So I do end up watching some of those random things, and I remember the pointing out the Uggs.
Yeah. Like, why is she wearing Uggs in the
Yeah,
1800s?
that is a thing that they should have paid a little bit more attention to. And like the average viewer isn't gonna notice that. Like I didn't notice that when I first watched it.
Mhm.
But if
It's
you
not a deal
start,
breaker, but still
yeah.
kind of.
But I have a feeling that if I ever watch the 2019 one with Sarah, Sarah is going to be picking over the clothes because Sarah is one who she pays attention to the styles, and she's probably going to
Mhm.
have issues with the way that some of them are dressed,
But
and
I
probably their
like
hair as well.
yeah, but I like the fact I just in general the costumes I think are better in this and like little details like the dress that Meg wears to Sally Moffat's party, you later see Amy wearing in Europe when she's painting. And so
Oh,
which is
really?
something that would absolutely happen in a family
Yeah.
like this at that time because you couldn't afford to have tons and tons of
Yeah.
dresses.
I'll have to go back and check that out. Yeah, that's interesting. That's a good
Mhm.
catch.
Overall, I don't know, I just really like I said, do have a very heavy nostalgia, but I like Winona Ryder a lot, and I think if you get a good Joe, I think that
Hmm.
goes a long way in making a good Little Women adaptation. I mean, Katharine Hepburn was the very first Joe that we ever had. You can't get better for playing a headstrong, a headstrong leading lady. You can't get better than Katharine Hepburn. I mean, come on. And that kind of set the blueprint of Joe in the movies, I think.
Hmm. Well, one little detail that's very random that I enjoyed was the fact that there were cats all over this movie.
Yeah.
Like in the book, they have pets. They talk about different cats. They have a bird. That like animals are kind of a big background thing in the book. And I don't remember that in the 2019 version, but maybe they were there and I just didn't notice. But I noticed cats all over the place in this version, and I really like that. Especially the one they've got one in a bonnet at one point that
Oh
made me
yeah.
laugh.
That she's playing the contests of
Yes.
wherever.
Yeah, I really liked that.
Yeah, that was cute.
Well, you talked before about the scene with the book, and that was another part where I feel like it was trimmed too much. Like it was so short, and it felt like there was no build up, and then the repercussions were over so quick. I feel like it
Mhm.
needed to be more emotionally impactful because, like, they go to the party, she's mad, she gets back, the book is gone, and then she attacks her. Like, she's
Mhm.
that scene where she's like furious about the book and she's screaming that she's gonna kill her. That was some good acting.
Mhm. I don't know. I mean, I guess because it's kind of looking back at these little vignettes from life, like it kind of
Hmm.
works for me. And maybe part of it helps that I just know these characters so well that I don't
Hmm.
need like the build up and the kind of the developing. Like I immediately, oh, this is that scene. Okay, let's do it.
Hmm.
Uh,
One thing that I kept thinking about was the fact that, like, for different movies, Sarah and I have watched like really
Mhm.
old silent films, and
Yeah.
especially like A Christmas Carol and even like the first Alice in Wonderlands,
Hmm.
we kept talking about how these would not work as movies because they're basically just scenes. And they were like, at one point, I remember reading, like, they made this specifically for people who are already familiar with the book, just so that they could see their scenes, these iconic scenes happening. And
Yeah.
this is not the same as that, but it reminded me of that because it
Yeah.
was just at least for the first half, I felt like it was just a series of scenes that was happening.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like when you think about your family life, if you are with your family and you kind of start to reminisce about little vignettes kind of your family,
Hmm.
and this is sort of telling the story of this family, the March family. So it's almost like a bunch of little short stories versus an overarching plot. I mean, I guess the
Hmm.
overarching plot is Joe, and her life is kind of the main narrative. She's the the lead character, and then the rest would be the supporting characters. But yeah, I mean, it is true that this is a story that's been part of me since I was 8 years old. That
Hmm.
I can't honestly remember a time in my life when I didn't know about Little Women, and hadn't been watching the movies and reading the book and all of that. And so it's just something that helped me also in the 2019 version, because the 2019 version, it really jumps around to all
Hmm.
different time periods and within the family. And so you're kind of the director, I think, assumes going into it that you know at least something about the story in
Hmm.
order to understand what's going on. And in this, at least it's got a narrative flow to it in a way. But yeah, I can see how they could have fleshed things out a little bit more. I guess I never really thought about it before, but I think that scene works for me because Amy is a little girl. She's a child. And when you're growing up, especially when you have annoying younger siblings that are driving you crazy, then you do have those kind of fights sometimes where you say horrible things and you're like,
Hmm.
"Yeah, I hate you," and whatever, and you find a way to get along again, and everything's going to be okay. And I do love Marty in that scene. He says, "Don't let the sun go out on your anger and forgive each other, love each other." That whole scene
Hmm.
is so good. You never had those kind of fights with your siblings?
Oh, yeah. I'm sure they probably were more violent too, because we were all boys.
We had some pretty heated moments. I mean, my younger sister was an angel human. She was so kind, but my older brother and I were the ones that would fight terrible. I mean, awful. Ugh. But we're just super different. So I think that speaks to me as opposed to her being an adult playing the part.
Hmm. One thing that I'm not sure, like, the whole scene, it felt off, and I don't know why. It was the scene with the Moffats, like when Meg goes to the party.
Uh huh.
How much of all that speech about like the silk being made with slave or child labor
Yeah.
was that in the book? Because I did not
No.
remember that.
So that's not in the book. That is actually coming from Louisa May Alcott herself. So that's some kind of they added that
Hmm.
kind of into the character. With her father was outspoken against slavery and against
Hmm.
a lot of those things. And her father, I think, ran a school, and it was segregated. It wasn't segregated like so many of the schools were.
Hmm.
And so her father was quite revolutionary for his time. And his father was also a transcendentalist, which is a very popular belief system of that time period in the
Hmm.
1850s and 60s.
Yeah, that was mentioned in the movie too.
Hmm. And that was coming from Louisa May Alcott, not from the novel itself.
I kind of wondered about that because I knew about that in her real life, but I haven't finished the book, so I didn't know how much of that was actually part of the book and how much of that was part of her real life story and how much they were merging them.
Yeah, but I kind of like that.
It made sense, yeah. What was that party? Because they talked about it being a coming out party, and Aunt
Yeah.
March was talking about Meg needing to have one before she could get married. Was that like a thing back then? It's not
Mhm.
something that I'm very familiar with.
Yeah, I'm not like an expert on it, but I think that during that time, the young ladies would be presented. They would like have a debut at one of the balls, and that was kind of their way of saying that she was open for courting and getting married,
Oh, okay.
basically.
Is it sort of like a quinceañera? I'm not familiar with those as much, but I'm more familiar with those.
I think that's probably a pretty fair comparison. I'm not
Okay.
that expert on that either, but
I've seen
uh,
them on TV shows, so I'm
yeah.
familiar with it just from a very broad pop culture standpoint. I've never actually been to one or anything.
Yeah. There was a coming out party, which is basically them saying she's ready to get married, is my understanding.
Okay. That's kind of what I was thinking, but I wasn't exactly sure.
Yeah. I think that the girls all have really nice chemistry. I think that they all feel, with the exception of maybe grown up Amy, uh, I think maybe doesn't really feel like she fits in. Um,
I can see that. Not that she didn't feel like the same character, but she felt like just slightly too different. Like she was almost a
mhm.
little bit too cold, maybe. I
Yeah.
don't know. She didn't seem quite as bubbly. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't
like,
know if
it's
that's
kind
the
of
right
like
word.
on when they this is the downside to using 2 Amy's is that it's kind of like on the show Chopped, when a contestant will make 2 dishes instead of just 1, and they'll say, "Oh, you shouldn't have done that. Now we're gonna have 2 things to compare it to instead of just 1." And so
Mm,
that's kind of the downside, is that I like it because it makes the early parts much better because Amy's a child, as she's supposed to be. But then again, it gives you 2 things to compare for, and you're like, "Oh, I like, Kirsten Dunst better."
yeah. If I was to like pick one, definitely Kirsten Dunst.
Mhm. Yeah. So I don't know what's the best way to go. I don't know, I just love the movie. It's just such a great family film about a family and girls and
Hmm.
sisters and their experiences, and it's just amazing to me that whether it's the 2019 version, which I also really loved, or the Katharine Hepburn version or the book, it's just a story that's, I think, speaks to all generations because we can all relate to being in families and it being difficult and wanting to be more than what is sort of presented before you in your life and having
Hmm.
dreams and all of that is just very appealing. I think also the idea of Joe being a writer and is very
Hmm.
appealing. It's something that I think a lot of us kind of want to do,
Hmm.
and it has a lot of great themes of forgiveness and service and love and romance and courage. Even little scenes I think are so great, like when Amy takes her limes, she gets whipped by the teacher,
Hmm.
and Joe gets super upset, and Meg, you failed to tell me that they were forbidden.
Hmm.
I mean, I don't know, who can relate to that, of just feeling scolded and frustrated and just the frustrations of childhood
Hmm.
that it seems like nobody quite gets what you're trying to say. And when Joe talks about that she'll never find somebody who understands her, and she's so sad about Lori. I don't know, just you there's just so many great moments in the book and in the
Hmm.
movie, and I think this one does Joe the best. I think it does Amy the best. I think it does Beth the best. So it's that's why it ends up being my favorite.
You didn't mention Meg. Do you think a different one does Meg better?
I actually love Emma Watson as Meg. I think she's
Hmm.
really good. And I'm
Yeah.
normally like a middle in the road with her, but I really loved her in that role, and so she's my favorite. I mean, I love Katharine Hepburn as Joe as well, so it's like a toss up between her and Winona Ryder.
How did you feel about Lori and Amy together
In
in
this one,
like this version? Yeah.
I think that it's okay. It's fine. But I think the whole reaction to it all feels really weak in this one when she comes back.
It was kind of just brushed over, yeah. What about
Yeah.
like it started when they were kids. Did it feel weird to you, that whole scene, like after Beth has contracted scarlet fever and she's sent away and Laurie is taking her to stay
Mhm.
with Aunt March? Did that scene feel weird to you?
No, because that is in the book.
Okay.
Like,
Just
I
the
promise to
line
kiss
about
you.
promising to kiss her before she dies felt weird. And I think they tried to play it off as a joke because he laughs afterwards. I
Yeah.
don't know. It felt kind of weird because he's almost an adult and she's still like 12. So it felt kind
Right.
of weird to me. And I mean, it didn't feel too weird because I know how this is going to end. I know they're
Like,
going to eventually end up together and this is supposed to be
yeah, like he's
foreshadowing.
I think he's just talking about the kissing her on the cheek or whatever. Like I don't think it's anything too skeevy or anything, but yeah, I can understand. I can see why. But
Hmm.
I think just because it's in the book, I didn't think of it too much, but
One other thing that maybe you won't know this either, but I was kind of confused. Like after the time jump, when it's 4 years later, they're at the wedding.
uh-huh.
What are they doing at the wedding? Like they're in this giant bird cage and they're like circling them and singing. Is that some kind of a tradition that I've just never heard of?
I thought it was just like a little gazebo, like a little wedding
Okay. Well,
gazebo.
even still, like what were like the whole singing and dancing around them? I've never seen that anywhere
Oh
else.
yeah. Oh, I don't know. It didn't seem that like it's just like a little dance. I don't know. They had like they had dances back then that were kind
Yeah,
of
that's
like
that's
that.
true. It just I don't know the way that they were like all linked hands, circling around the couple and singing,
Uh-huh.
and I don't know. It just seemed like something that I should know what they were doing, and I just didn't know what they were doing. I didn't know if it was some long forgotten tradition that has just passed out of fashion or what.
Yeah, I think it's just out of fashion. I mean, it's even weirder in the 2019 when first of all she looks like she's from the 1970s with that hair and and the bride, her hair all down with the big puffy sleeves. That would never happen. But I think they just did circular dances back then like that. Oh, it says it in the book that Louisa talks about the arranges everyone in a folksy German wedding dance. So there you
Oh,
go.
maybe it's a German tradition.
Yeah, folksy German wedding dance.
Hmm. Okay.
Yep. So there you go.
What did you think of the scene after that where Laurie tries to propose to Joe and she does not want to get married?
I mean, like I said, it's hard because Christian Bale is so charming that you're kind of mad at her in this one. Whereas, I mean, he's not quite so suave and debonair in the book. And I don't know. I mean, I think there's something kind of romantic about that idea of somebody of almost refusing somebody like that. I think is
Hmm.
that I think there's kind of something there that she's so strong and so that we're just we're just like brother and sister. But a lot of people hate that. A lot of people are, like I said, Joe and Lori shippers.
I can see it both ways because I do think that they would make a good couple, even though she says that they would kill each other. I do think that they have good chemistry, but the way they interact, it is really sibling like. So I don't know. I can see it both ways.
Yeah.
How much of a time jump is it between the wedding and everybody like moving to Paris and New York and everything? Is that a long time or is that like kind of immediate? It's 4 years between like the first half and the wedding, but like everybody moves on after the wedding. It feels like maybe a year when things start happening in their respective places. Like Meg gets pregnant and has a baby or two babies. They have twins later on in the movie.
Hmm.
So it can't be too long because Joe moves to New
Um,
York and Amy moves to Paris to study art and Meg has a family.
I would guess that it's like a year.
Okay, that's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah.
One thing we haven't talked about is when Joe moves to New York, she meets someone. And what did
Hmm.
you think of Professor Bear?
I do think Gabriel Byrne is one of the better Professor Bears. I mean,
Okay.
he is a
I
lot
was
older than her, but it doesn't feel quite as jarring as it does for some of the other combinations.
yeah, and
Um,
not to keep going back to the 2019 version, but it felt more natural in this one than the 2019 version.
yeah. But he is, I mean, Gabriel Byrne is a lot older than over 20 years older than Winona Ryder, but I feel like he
Mm.
fudges it pretty well, makes it believable. It works pretty well, I think. Winona Ryder got, an Oscar nomination for this movie. So,
That does not surprise me. She was really good.
and Colleen Atwood for the costumes
Yeah, the costumes were great.
and the score. And I still can, every time I hear For the Beauty of the Earth, I think of this movie. Every time they
Yeah,
play it at
that's
church. For the beauty of the earth.
I know the song, so I know like it probably was
Hmm.
played in church, but I don't remember. I don't have too many specific memories of that
That's
one.
probably because you didn't watch this movie a million times.
I think now though, I think it'll probably be more tied to this
I
movie.
know, that's what I'm saying. For the love which from all over and around us lies. Lord of all, to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise. I just think Claire Danes is so good, is Beth in this. She's great.
Yeah, the scene where she's at the Hummels, the look on her face when she's handed this screaming infant. I
Yeah.
don't think it was supposed to be funny, but it was like, I think that's probably how I would feel in that situation.
Yeah.
And
Uh,
then like all the scenes with her in bed, and then they had that the fake out scene, like when Joe is coming down the stairs and she sees Hannah crying in the empty bed. It's like she thinks that she's died.
uh-huh.
Yeah, they did a lot of really good scenes with Beth.
Yeah, when she's on deathbed and her like face is so pale
Hmm.
and I never had plans like all of you. I never had dreams. Now I'm going first. Uh, I mean, forget it.
Well, I guess we can talk about the death scene because
Hmm.
that's like the one thing that most people know about this is the one dies. So Beth dies.
Hmm.
You said that this made you cry.
Hmm. I think she totally earns it.
Yeah,
She gets all pale.
it didn't make me cry, and in fairness, not a whole lot makes me cry. It takes a lot for something to even make me tear up. However, there was a scene in this part that did make me tear up, like significantly, and it was Hannah scattering the petals on the dolls and holding the dolls' hands. That was like, oh my word, that is so sad. I don't know why that got to me more than Beth actually dying, but just Hannah sprinkling the petals and holding the doll's hand. Oh my word.
Yeah.
It was such a good scene.
Yeah, that was good. I'm the opposite of you. I am public waterworks. I am very easy to cry. But I don't know, I just think that she just gives it her all into the
Hmm.
performance. She does everything she can for that.
Yeah, she really did. I guess we didn't talk about Hannah too much. She's kind of a background character,
Mhm.
but she's one I do, she seems familiar to me, but I don't know that I've seen her in anything. Do you recognize her from anything else?
Um,
She doesn't have a whole lot of credits on IMDb.
mm-mm.
I don't know. She just seemed kind of familiar to me, but she was really good.
Yeah, she was good. And it's an interesting character because, it's sort of the last remaining sort of vestiges of their wealth is that
Hmm.
that's their one servant that they still have.
Another thing that I was wondering about towards the end when Laurie appears with Amy, was that a surprise in the book, or was there any, like, did they court or date or anything in the book, like on paper?
You read about him courting her
Okay.
and her experience. There's chapters from Amy's perspective, and I'm trying to remember. It's been a while since I read the book, but because she's engaged to another person in Europe,
Mm-hmm.
and I think she might send a letter, but I can't remember. I have to say, I can't remember in the book. I'd have to read it again.
One thing that I did like was when Laurie finds her in Europe, and he asks Aunt March if she's married, or maybe he asks if she's engaged, and she
Hmm.
just says, "Not yet."
Right.
That cracked me up. Aunt March was really great. I liked her.
Hmm. Yeah,
I
so
also
good.
liked how I don't know how much they did on purpose, but she seemed to physically age. Like she seems, even though she's already pretty old at the
Hmm.
beginning, by the end she seems a whole lot more older than she did. And I don't know if they did any makeup or just the way they
Hmm.
shot it, or if they, I don't know. I liked that touch that
Hmm.
she just felt older by the end. And of course she
Yeah.
dies too off screen, but I don't know. I liked that she
Yeah.
actually seemed to age.
Yeah, that was good. She was really good.
Well, I guess we could talk about the very end when Joe finds out that she's been left Plumfield, and she finds out she's getting published,
Hmm.
and she's reunited with Professor Bear.
Yeah.
How did you like that whole scene?
I always liked it. The kiss in the rain.
Yeah, I don't have a huge, like I said, I haven't finished the book again, so I don't remember from when I was a kid. I didn't remember how accurate it was to the book, or even if that matters.
Hmm.
Like, I'm just curious as to how you felt about how it ended.
Yeah, I always really liked it. And my hands are empty. I have nothing to offer. Not empty now. So it's very good.
A little cheesy, but it works.
Hey, I like cheesy. What can I say? Romance is inherently cheesy. It's just part of the game. I mean, even in real
Yeah,
life,
kinda. Yeah.
romance is cheesy. It just is. You talk to anybody about their story, and you'll be like, "Oh, that was pretty cheesy." And so I like the ending. I do. And going, of course, then they go on to have school in the big house. That's where you get
Hmm.
Little Men. Is Joe's school?
Yeah, this is one of those things where now that I'm seeing these versions, I feel like I'm going to be upset that they never did a sequel, because that was when I was a kid even, like with the original Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. I was so upset that they never made Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator into a movie.
Uh-huh.
So
I
I
don't know
feel
how you
like
make
I'm gonna.
that book into a movie, though.
Well, they're planning on doing it on Netflix, so we'll
Yeah,
see.
we'll see.
But yeah, it's like I know that Little Men and Joe's Boys are a thing, so now that I'm going to be watching these versions, I'm just going to be wondering about what happened to this specific version of the character. Like, I want to know more. Like, I wish they would have made sequels. And I don't know how much I'll care depending on how much I like the movie. It would be interesting to
Yeah,
see this particular version continue, which is
yeah.
impossible now because that was, I
It
guess,
is
almost 20
a
years ago.
story that is seems to be very easy to translate into into film. Even though we had some bad versions for a while there, like the
Hmm.
PBS version, and then the modern day version, which was so bad.
There's another one that I'll probably end up doing by myself. So, well, did you ever see my video on the Secret Garden version where it was like vlogs? It was called the Misselthwaite Archives. They
Oh,
they did a Little Women version like that where Joe was a vlogger, and I don't remember a whole lot of it, but I think it wasn't that great. I'll probably revisit that at some point too, but
yeah,
I'll probably just do it by myself because I don't want to force somebody to sit through hours and hours and hours of YouTube videos of Joe vlogging.
but I think that Little Women, it's a timeless story because it's about a family. It's about women. There's not that many stories that are really written for women, even today. Uh, there's not as many, and this is just, I think, it and really Anna Green Gables are sort of. you had your Mark Twain and your Tom Sawyer on one side, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe even a little later, Catcher in the Rye, kind of stories about kind of growing up and being a boy. And for girls, you had Little Women and you had Anne Green Gables.
I wonder if that's kind of how the scenes with her getting rejected by the editor came about, because they were talking about like they didn't want stories for girls. Maybe that was like a real
Mhm,
thing. I
mhm,
mean, I'm sure it was, but it was probably
mhm. Oh,
rather
yeah, definitely.
widespread, and that's probably why there aren't that many. Because
Mhm.
I bet people were writing them, but they just weren't being published.
Yeah, well, and there's always been this myth that girls' stories, even fairly recently, I mean, people were convinced that the Little Mermaid wasn't going to be a big hit because girls' movies didn't sell as well as boys' movies, and that was crazy talk.
Hmm.
But it's still you still see that perpetuating. A lot of people
Yeah,
say, "Well, make something for boys because girls will watch something for boys, but boys will not watch something for girls." And that's still sort of an impression that you have today, but I think that's selling our young men short. I think that they'll watch something that's for girls.
I mean,
But
I did. And
yeah,
maybe I'm just a weirdo, but I read everything. I watched everything.
yeah.
I didn't care. It didn't bother me until people started pointing it out.
Like, I think a lot of boys will watch Frozen or,
Yeah.
Tangled or whatever.
Yeah, I don't think it's an issue for them until grown-ups make it an issue.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, it never bothered me. Like I said, I read this. My mom read it to all of us. We're all boys.
Mhm.
We It
But
didn't
especially
strike
it's
me as weird at all.
especially true in fantasy. Almost no fantasy series, aside from fairy tales, I guess, have
Hmm.
leading female protagonists. At least the traditional fantasy stories. Almost none of them did. So you'd have to go to something like Little Women or Jane Eyre, or that was the kind of
Hmm.
stories. Even if you look at something more modern like Roald Dahl, his fantasy, aside from Matilda, almost all
Hmm.
of the women in his stories are absolutely terrible. They're almost all just the worst. Whether it's Trunchbull or the
Hmm.
ants and James the Giant Peach or
I feel
the
like I read at some
witches.
point that he was kind of working through childhood trauma,
Yeah.
because like he had people in his past that
Well,
were
then
like those
that's
characters.
what I wonder. I was like, were the nuns really mean to you in school, or what was the problem?
Maybe it was.
Maybe.
I'm not an
Uh,
expert on his life or anything, but I just remember reading that it was those people were inspired by people in his real life.
mhm. But anyway, almost all heroes of literature are white men
Hmm.
because those were most of the people writing the stories for a long time.
Or getting published.
Yeah.
I wonder how many books and stories are just lost because they weren't published. I
Hmm.
wonder how many were written by authors that never made it, that we would love today, but we won't have a chance to read them.
Hmm.
That's kind of an interesting thing that I've never really
Yeah.
thought about before now.
But
Huh.
another one that I think is very similar to Little Women would be the Little House books,
I
Lauren
loved those
Householder. I
books
think
as a kid.
them and Anna Green Gables, those are just
Hmm.
very iconic childhood reads.
Yeah, they'll probably end up in on this podcast at some point. Those are a little bit more of a time commitment because the versions that have been made are like
So
series,
right, yeah.
and it's a little harder to do that when like everything is a series.
Yeah. Well, you should listen for Hallmarkies Podcast. We did me and Alonzo Giraldi, the film critic, we did a comparison of all four versions of Little Women that
Yeah.
they made
I
for
I listened to that. I'll have to link that
it.
in the description if people want to listen to that.
Yeah, you
I
should
bet
check
some
it
people
out.
would be interested.
But yeah, I love this version because of Winona Ryder and Claire Danes, Kirsten Dunst.
Yeah. It is pretty good, but like I said, I feel like having just read part of it, I felt like I was maybe too critical. I don't know.
Yeah, I can understand that. I can understand that.
It'll be interesting to see how I feel once I've watched more versions, because I've watched a little bit of the 49 one, and just the beginning, I really liked the beginning, even though I didn't watch past the first scene. And I'm
Mm.
wondering if that's going to end up being one of my favorites.
Yeah, you have to let me know.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining me. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was great. Thanks for having me.
Do you want to let people know where they can find you if they want more from you?
Yeah, you can find me at Rachel's Reviews, all over social media, iTunes, YouTube, and on Rotten Tomatoes. So please check that out. And also, you can find me at the Hallmarkies Podcast. We have lots of great stuff going on over there.
Okay, and I'll have those linked in the description, as well as your Little Women episode for people who want to listen to that.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, well,
Right.
we'll probably have to have you back for another episode, whether it's Little Women or something else, but
Yeah, that'd be fun.
I guess until then, we'll see you later. Thank you to Rachel for joining me for this episode of Every Version Ever. I'll have her links in the description, as well as the link to her Hallmarkies episode discussing 4 different versions of Little Women. If you want more from Rachel on the many ways this story has been adapted, be sure to check that out. Next time on the show, I'll be joined by my cousin Sarah. She's also a fan of Little Women, but her favorite version is the 1949 adaptation. So join us next week when Sarah and I will be talking about another iconic Margaret O'Brien film. Seriously, between my 2 podcasts, I think this will be our 3rd. And we'll see you next time on Every Version Ever. Thanks for listening.